When thinking about mapping, there are two parallel um, concepts. One is the content and skills, the knowing and the doing, or what we teach, and the other is the environment in which we observe that behavior or which students are to operate. This is the context. I look at content and skills, the knowing and the doing, as the stuff taught, and essential questions and the assessment are the context in which the student is expected to operate, and we would observe them appropriately applying content and skills. And the third part of all of this is the ability to collect meaningful data when assessing students so that we can tell whether they are, in fact, behaving, performing appropriately. With meaningful data collection through assessment, we're able to monitor the effectiveness of our teaching, set goals, and raise the bar year after year, or at least monitor what is being taught and how well it's being taught. What we teach is driven by national, state, district outcomes, district initiatives. And I've put these here on this slide so that we can see which ones are grouped together, at least in terms of the MEC national standards and the state standards. District outcomes and district initiatives are local. Again, the content and skills, content is taught with a skill set in mind. The knowledge is expected to be performed at a specific skill or behavior. What we teach should be observable. In music, the content often remains static. One might argue that music is music, but we are always being asked by society, curriculum, by new technologies, new contexts in our culture, to challenge the level of thinking about what students should know, how they should be able to demonstrate the knowledge that they've gained. On the other side, teaching takes place within a context or within an environment. The essential question is the big idea that we are trying to teach, and the assessment is that opportunity for us to observe their behavior as we've taught them. There's a relationship there. The essential question groups the content and skills into a relationship. All of the elements of the curriculum are interdependent. As I've already alluded to, the content, the knowledge, is performed at a skill level in a behavior. It's specific. The essential questions embrace in groupings the content and skills. The assessment is the opportunity for us to observe their performance. Possible. Here are some thoughts about what an essential question is. You certainly can read these. You can pause at any time. And what an assessment is. So if we look at essential questions and assessments side by side, you can see the relationship beginning to develop that speaks to an environment for the need to learn something, and the environment in which we are able to observe that students have learned, or an environment for them to perform. Again, you can hit pause at any time to read. So when we sit down in the mapping context to generate essential questions, we need to brainstorm. First of all, considering the existing curriculum map, reviewing the content and skills, and to see if we are actually matching content and skills together. When we group these in clusters of concepts and ideas, and then consider the standards or initiatives in which we are teaching these content-skill relationships, and we review the reason why they are essential. We might, before we even think of essential questions, we may even think about, when matching with standards, whether content and skills currently being taught are essential or could be eliminated. It's important to think of the justification or the reason for teaching as the bridge between the essential question assessment relationship and the current content being taught. And next, we would observe the ways we would observe the appropriate application of the new learning. And we could be creative here. This would be an assessment. And then by thinking about the content in clusters and the skills associated with that content, and thinking about the standards, thinking about district initiatives, what creative ways can we embrace the content-skill relationships into an essential question about how we would expect students to behave, and then assessments can grow from there. Another view of this in a flowchart version. Again, you can stop at any time by hitting pause. Now we're considering essential questions and grouped after reviewing standards, clustered and grouped content-skill relationships, maybe even push the level of skill that we expect content to be demonstrated or used. We need to consider Bloom's taxonomy. And in music, in K through 5, we've begun to think more and more about music learning theory. And there's a parallel between that and Bloom's taxonomy. We can see that the music learning theory grows from simply an awareness or a knowledge setting to creating relationships between what they hear, what it's called, and the function of musical elements, musical content, both tonal and rhythm. And at the highest levels of music learning theory, we are into composition and analysis, theoretical understanding. But at the earliest levels, the performing and the understanding of what's internalized or being thought musically is at the lowest knowledge levels. Labeling them is at the comprehension level. And like I said, there's a somewhat parallel relationship, but it's really hard to define exactly how all of these levels match with Bloom's, but there is that relationship, and much of this is very, very similar. Music learning theory is very similar to cognitive thought and language development and the skill sequence of language development. And I think that's why it's very important for us as musicians to understand this, because it does give us that connection to ELA. So we can observe how they're behaving with the content at the skill level so that we can monitor the effectiveness of our teaching, adjust our strategies, and raise the bar. Content, skill, essential question, and assessment all are thought of kind of in a simultaneous manner, kind of like pistons firing in an engine.